Marlene Dietrich promised her last role would be death itself. "I want to die alone in Paris." On May 6, 1992, she kept that promise, vanishing into silence while her glamour, the very thing she sold to the world, remained immortal. The woman who scandalized Berlin cabarets, seduced Hollywood through shadows and song, and entertained Allied troops with fierce patriotism, had mastered the ultimate performance, disappearing completely while her legend grew stronger with each passing year. "Glamour is what I sell. It's my stock in trade," she had declared at the height of her fame. But the cruel mathematics of that transaction became clear only in the end. She had sold glamour so successfully that she became its prisoner, trapped within an image so perfect and untouchable that the woman behind it slowly disappeared. The legs that had driven men to madness, the voice that had seduced audiences across 3 continents, the androgynous beauty that challenged every convention of its time. All had been commodities in a marketplace that consumed its sellers as efficiently as its buyers. The apartment where she dies reflects the strange duality that defined her entire existence. Photographs from her glory days line the walls. Marlene in top hat and tails, Marlene kissing a woman in Morocco, Marlene entertaining Allied troops during World War II. But the woman herself has become invisible, refusing interviews, photographers, and visitors who might shatter the illusion of eternal glamour that her legend requires. She has achieved the ultimate expression of control, disappearing completely while her image grows more iconic with each passing year. "I sold glamour all my life, but no one bought me," she had written with devastating clarity, capturing the fundamental loneliness of someone who had mastered the art of desire while remaining forever beyond possession. The femme fatale who could reduce strong men to trembling admirers had learned that the very qualities that made her irresistible also made her untouchable, that the mystique she cultivated for professional purposes eventually became a wall that no genuine human connection could penetrate. To understand how a cabaret singer from Berlin became the most compelling and ultimately tragic figure in cinema history, we must journey back to the beginning. To a time when gender was performance, sexuality was rebellion, and a young woman named Maria Magdalene Dietrich discovered she could become anyone she chose to be, as long as she was willing to sacrifice whoever she actually was in the process. December 27, 1901, Schöneberg, Berlin. Maria Magdalene Dietrich enters a world on the cusp of unprecedented social transformation, born into a middle-class Prussian family whose rigid respectability provides the perfect foundation for rebellion. Her father, Louis Erich Otto Dietrich, serves as a police lieutenant whose sudden death when Marlene is 11 removes the primary source of masculine authority from her life, creating a vacuum that she will spend decades learning to fill herself. The Germany of Marlene's youth operates according to strict social hierarchies and gender expectations that will soon crumble under the weight of war, revolution, and cultural upheaval. But during her childhood, these structures remain intact, providing clear rules about how young women should behave, speak, and present themselves to the world. These constraints, rather than limiting Marlene, seem to energize her. She discovers early that the most powerful form of rebellion involves mastering the rules so completely that she can violate them with devastating effect. Her mother, Wilhelmina Elisabeth Josephine, represents the kind of stern Prussian propriety that values discipline over emotion, order over spontaneity. These lessons in self-control and emotional restraint will later prove essential to Marlene's screen persona. But they also establish patterns of isolation that makes genuine intimacy nearly impossible throughout her life. The young girl who learns to suppress her feelings in service of perfect presentation will grow into a woman who can project any emotion required while remaining essentially unknowable. The musical education that begins during Marlene's childhood provides her first taste of performance. and the intoxicating power that comes from commanding an audience's attention. Her violin lessons teach her discipline, precision, and the importance of hitting exact notes at precisely the right moments. Skills that will later translate seamlessly to film acting and the kind of controlled sensuality that makes her famous. But more importantly, music teaches her that performance can be more authentic than reality. That carefully constructed artifice can convey truth more effectively than spontaneous expression. World War I's outbreak when Marlene is 13 dramatically alters German society while providing her with first-hand experience of how quickly social structures can collapse and reform. The war years teach her that identity is fluid, that survival often requires adaptability, and that the people who thrive during periods of chaos are those who can reinvent themselves most convincingly. These lessons will prove invaluable during her later career transformations, but they also establish her tendency to treat all relationships as temporary arrangements rather than permanent commitments. The collapse of Imperial Germany and the birth of the Weimar Republic during Marlene's late teenage years creates unprecedented opportunities for young people willing to challenge traditional expectations. The new Germany celebrates experimentation, artistic innovation, and social rebellion, qualities that make Marlene's particular combination of intelligence, beauty, and androgynous appeal perfectly suited for the cultural moment. She begins to understand that her unusual qualities, which might have been liabilities in her parents' generation, could become assets in the emerging modern world. The 1920s find Marlene Dietrich navigating Berlin's intoxicating cabaret scene with the calculating precision of someone who understands that survival requires constant reinvention. The city's nightlife offers unprecedented freedom for artistic and sexual experimentation, but it also demands a particular kind of sophistication, the ability to be shocking without seeming desperate, rebellious without appearing uncontrolled. Marlene masters this balance with an intuitive understanding that will serve her throughout her career. Her early performances in Berlin's clubs and theaters reveal someone who has learned to use her unusual beauty as a weapon rather than an ornament. Unlike conventional pretty girls who rely on innocence and accessibility for their appeal, Marlene cultivates an aura of dangerous sophistication that makes audiences simultaneously attracted and intimidated. She develops the kind of controlled sensuality that suggests vast experience while revealing nothing about actual desires or vulnerabilities. The emergence of her distinctive style during this period, the men's clothing worn with feminine accessories, the cigarettes held like theatrical props, the knowing smile that implies secrets she'll never share, represents more than fashion choices. These elements combine to create a visual language of gender rebellion that challenges fundamental assumptions about how women should present themselves while maintaining enough traditional glamour to avoid alienating mainstream audiences. Her marriage to Rudolf Sieber in 1923 and the birth of their daughter Maria in 1924 provide Marlene with respectability and emotional grounding, but they also create tensions between her domestic obligations and professional ambitions that will define the rest of her life. The conventional wife and mother role conflicts with her emerging identity as an artist whose appeal depends on seeming unattainable and dangerous. She learns to compartmentalize these different aspects of her existence, a skill that will later prove both essential and destructive. The audition for The Blue Angel in 1929 represents the moment when all of Marlene's accumulated skills, experience, and calculated mystique converge to create something unprecedented in cinema history. Director Josef von Sternberg doesn't just see a beautiful actress, he recognizes someone who has perfected the art of controlled revelation, who can project infinite depth while maintaining complete mystery. The screen test that wins her the role captures qualities that will define her entire career. The ability to be simultaneously vulnerable and predatory, innocent and experienced, available and untouchable. The filming of The Blue Angel requires Marlene to embody Lola Lola, a cabaret singer whose sexuality destroys the men who desire her. But the role also allows her to synthesize everything she has learned about performance, gender, and power into a single character. The famous sequence where she sings Falling in Love Again while perched on a chair in fishnet stockings becomes one of cinema's most iconic moments, but it also represents the birth of a screen persona that will eventually trap Marlene as completely as it liberates her. "I am at heart a gentleman," Marlene observes during this period, capturing both her understanding of gender as performance and her intuitive grasp of how androgynous appeal can be more powerful than conventional femininity. The comment reveals someone who has learned to think of herself as a character she's playing rather than a person she's being. A perspective that serves her brilliantly professionally while making authentic self-knowledge increasingly difficult to achieve. 1930 arrives like a thunderclap that transforms not just Marlene Dietrich's career but the entire landscape of cinematic sexuality. Her Hollywood debut in Morocco creates a cultural earthquake that reverberates far beyond entertainment industry boundaries, establishing her as the most dangerous woman in cinema while simultaneously beginning her transformation from actress into living artwork. Beautiful, untouchable, and ultimately inhuman in its perfection. Joseph von Sternberg's direction in Morocco recognizes that Marlene's appeal lies not in conventional beauty but in her ability to embody contradictions that seem impossible to reconcile. She plays Amy Jolly, a nightclub singer who arrives in Morocco with a mysterious past and an even more mysterious future. But the character becomes a vehicle for exploring themes of gender, sexuality, and power that Hollywood had never dared to address so directly. The sequence where Marlene, dressed in men's evening wear, kisses a woman in the audience before tossing the flower to Gary Cooper has become one of cinema's most iconic moments. But its impact in 1930 cannot be overstated. This single scene challenges fundamental assumptions about gender roles, sexual identity, and the boundaries of acceptable behavior while maintaining enough ambiguity to avoid censorship. Marlene has learned to be shocking and safe simultaneously, rebellious and elegant, subversive and sophisticated. The success of Morocco establishes Marlene as Hollywood's answer to Greta Garbo. But where Garbo embodies mysterious melancholy, Marlene represents dangerous sophistication. She becomes the woman men want to possess and women want to become. But her appeal depends precisely on her impossibility to achieve either goal. The mystique she cultivates requires maintaining perfect distance from everyone who desires her, creating a psychological prison that grows more confining with each successful film. The collaboration between Marlene and von Sternberg during the early 1930s produces some of cinema's most visually stunning films, while also documenting the systematic transformation of a person into an object of worship. Each successive project, Dishonored, Shanghai Express, and Blonde Venus Amourette, presents Marlene as more exotic, more otherworldly, more removed from ordinary human experience. The lighting, costumes, and cinematography combine to create images of such artificial perfection that they seem to exist outside of normal reality. "Glamour is what I sell. It's my stock in trade," Marlene observes during this period with characteristic analytical detachment, but the comment reveals the fundamental transaction that governs her entire career. She has learned to commodify mystery, to package desire, to sell the very qualities that make her seem priceless. This business relationship with her own appeal serves her professionally while making genuine relationships increasingly impossible to maintain. The technical demands of maintaining her screen persona require Marlene to treat her own body as an artistic medium, rather than a source of personal pleasure or comfort. The lighting required to achieve her signature look, the costumes designed to create impossible silhouettes, the makeup that transforms her into a living artwork. All of these elements demand complete submission to aesthetic requirements that prioritize visual impact over physical comfort or individual expression. The studio system's approach to managing Marlene during her peak period reveals the entertainment industry's complete commodification of her identity. Executives schedule not just her working hours, but her social appearances, romantic relationships, and even private moments, treating every aspect of her existence as raw material for creating publicity that maintains her marketable mystique. The contracts governing her work extend far beyond film performances to encompass her entire lifestyle, requiring her to remain in character even when cameras aren't rolling. Perhaps most significantly, Marlene's success during this period depends on her ability to project confidence and superiority while maintaining complete emotional unavailability. Photographers, directors, and fashion editors want her precisely because she remains mysterious, untouchable, impossible to fully know or possess. This creates a professional dynamic that rewards her for the very qualities that make genuine relationships impossible: emotional distance, perfect self-control, and the ability to be whatever others need her to be without ever revealing what she might need for herself. The psychological toll of maintaining this level of performance becomes apparent only in retrospect. As colleagues from this period describe someone who seemed to live entirely on the surface, who had perfected the art of being present without actually being there. Marlene's greatest professional asset, her ability to embody ideals rather than express personality, gradually hollows out whatever authentic self might have existed beneath the carefully constructed image that makes her famous throughout Europe and establishes her as the definitive face of dangerous sophistication. The international fame that follows her Hollywood breakthrough provides Marlene with unprecedented power and influence, but it also completes her transformation from person into symbol. Audiences around the world project their desires and fantasies onto her image while knowing nothing about her actual thoughts, feelings, or experiences. She becomes a living myth, more real to her admirers than she is to herself, more authentic in performance than in private moments. The 1940s bring global conflict that transforms Marlene Dietrich from entertainment figure into moral crusader. But this evolution also reveals the psychological costs of decades spent treating herself as an artistic creation rather than a human being. When Nazi Germany rises to power and begins threatening the world, Marlene faces a choice that will define her legacy: remain neutral to protect her career or risk everything by taking a public stand against fascism. The decision to reject Nazi overtures and become an American citizen in 1939 represents more than political positioning. It's a fundamental assertion of the values that have always underlain her carefully constructed personas. The woman who has spent years challenging gender conventions and social expectations through her art now applies the same rebellious spirit to the most serious political questions of her era. But this moral courage comes at enormous personal cost, effectively ending her relationship with her homeland and many of her family members who cannot understand why she would abandon Germany for American success. The transformation of Marlene from symbol of dangerous sexuality into symbol of American patriotism requires yet another complete reinvention of her public image. The femme fatale who once embodied European sophistication now becomes the voice of democratic values, touring military bases and war zones to entertain Allied troops. This new role allows her to use her talents in service of causes larger than entertainment, but it also requires her to suppress aspects of her personality that don't align with her new patriotic image. The USO tours that occupy much of Marlene's energy during the war years provide her with some of the most meaningful experiences of her career, but they also expose her to trauma and human suffering that her previous glamorous existence had never required her to confront. Performing for soldiers facing death in combat teaches her that entertainment can serve purposes more serious than mere pleasure, but it also forces her to develop emotional calluses that make subsequent authentic relationships even more difficult to maintain. The awards and recognition that Marlene receives for her wartime service, including the Medal of Freedom from America and the Legion of Honor from France, validate her contributions to the Allied victory while also highlighting the strange trajectory of her career from Berlin cabaret singer to American patriot. The medals and citations acknowledge achievements that required genuine courage and sacrifice, but they also document her complete transformation from the person she had been during her German youth to someone virtually unrecognizable to her earlier self. The end of the war in 1945 forces Marlene to confront questions about her post-conflict identity that she had avoided while serving a clear patriotic purpose. The woman who had found meaning and satisfaction in supporting the war effort now faces the prospect of returning to an entertainment industry that values her primarily for the very qualities that her wartime service had taught her to see as superficial and ultimately meaningless. The 1950s witnessed Marlene Dietrich struggle to maintain relevance in an entertainment industry that has moved beyond the sophisticated European glamour she embodies. But these challenges also force her to confront the fundamental emptiness of a life built entirely around the creation and maintenance of artificial images. The changing cultural landscape makes her particular brand of mystery and sophistication seem dated, while her own internal development makes purely aesthetic concerns feel increasingly hollow. The emergence of method acting and more naturalistic approaches to performance makes Marlene's highly controlled style seem artificial and calculated compared to the raw emotional honesty that younger performers bring to their roles. Audiences who once found her inscrutability fascinating now prefer stars who seem more accessible and authentic, creating professional challenges that force her to question whether her entire approach to her career has been fundamentally misguided. The nightclub performances that increasingly dominate Marlene's schedule during the 1950s represent both artistic triumph and existential prison. Her cabaret shows at venues like the Café de Paris and Las Vegas stages transform her into a living museum of her own legend, performing not just songs but the very concept of Marlene Dietrich for audiences who come to witness glamour incarnate rather than discover new artistic territory. The sequined gowns, dramatic lighting, and carefully choreographed entrances create theatrical experiences of extraordinary sophistication, but they also complete her transformation into a beautiful artifact rather than a living artist. The international tours that occupy much of Marlene's energy during the late 1950s and early 1960s provide her with continued professional success, while also demonstrating how thoroughly she has become divorced from any sense of home or belonging. She becomes a citizen of hotels and theaters, more comfortable on stages than in private spaces, more authentic in performance than in personal relationships. The 1960s arrive with cultural upheavals that make Marlene Dietrich's sophisticated European glamour seem as antiquated as gaslight, forcing her to confront the possibility that everything she represents has become irrelevant to a world that values authenticity over artifice, rebellion over refinement, youth over experience. The counterculture movement's rejection of traditional authority and social conventions includes implicit criticism of the kind of carefully constructed mystique that has defined her entire career. The decision to withdraw from regular film work and focus primarily on live performance represents Marlene's recognition that her particular talents are better suited to the controlled environment of cabaret than to the evolving demands of contemporary cinema. The live shows allow her to maintain absolute control over lighting, pacing, and audience interaction, while avoiding the kind of close-up scrutiny that might reveal the physical effects of aging on someone whose appeal has always depended on visual perfection. The increasing reliance on alcohol and prescription medications that characterizes Marlene's daily routine during this period represents her attempt to manage the psychological pain of watching her relevance fade while maintaining the energy required for public performances. The substances that once enhanced her natural charisma now become necessary just to function, creating dependencies that gradually consume whatever authentic vitality might have survived decades of careful image management. The 1970s witnessed Marlene Dietrich's complete withdrawal from public life, a disappearance so thorough that even fashion historians struggle to trace her activities during these decades. The woman who once defined elegance for an entire generation chooses invisibility over compromise, silence over adaptation, becoming a ghost while still living, the ultimate expression of the control that had always been central to her identity and appeal. The apartment in Paris that becomes Marlene's primary residence during the late 1960s provides her with the kind of sophisticated European environment where her particular aesthetic still commands respect, but it also enables her increasing isolation from the changing world beyond her carefully controlled domain. The elegant furnishings and strategically placed photographs create a shrine to her own past while making her present existence feel increasingly ghostly and irrelevant. The health problems that begin affecting Marlene during her 60s force her to confront physical vulnerabilities that threaten the illusion of timeless glamour she has spent decades perfecting. The leg injury that increasingly limits her mobility becomes a closely guarded secret, as any public acknowledgement of physical limitation might compromise the mystique that her remaining career depends upon maintaining. The woman who had once moved with supernatural grace now requires assistance to navigate even simple physical tasks. But she continues performing the role of ageless sophistication, even when the effort becomes almost unbearable. The relationship with her daughter Maria becomes increasingly strained during this period, as Marlene's inability to separate her maternal role from her professional persona makes normal family interaction nearly impossible. The woman who could embody any character required for public consumption struggles to simply be a mother and grandmother without consideration of how such roles might affect her public image. Maria's later memoir reveals the cost of having a mother who treated even private family moments as potential threats to her carefully maintained mystique. The occasional journalists who manage to penetrate Marlene's isolation find themselves dealing with someone who has become more character than person, someone who can discuss her career with analytical precision, but seems incapable of honest reflection about her personal experiences or emotional life. The interviews that result from these encounters provide fascinating insights into her professional methods while revealing almost nothing about her authentic thoughts or feelings about the price she has paid for her achievements. The medical care that Marlene requires during her final years must be carefully managed to prevent any information about her condition from becoming public knowledge. The doctors and nurses who treat her become part of an elaborate conspiracy to maintain the illusion that Marlene Dietrich exists in a state of suspended animation, rather than experiencing the normal processes of aging and decline that affect all human beings. Even in illness, she continues performing the role of someone too sophisticated and mysterious to be subject to ordinary mortality. The rare interviews that Marlene grants during this period reveal someone struggling to maintain the mystique that has defined her career while dealing with questions about legacy, relevance, and the meaning of a life spent almost entirely in performance. Her responses demonstrate the wit and intelligence that made her compelling, but they also highlight how difficult it has become for her to discuss any topic without reference to her professional image and public persona. The phone calls that comprise most of Marlene's remaining social interaction during these years reveal someone desperate for human connection, but incapable of engaging in relationships that don't revolve around discussion of her professional achievements and past glory. Friends describe conversations that invariably drift toward memories of her greatest triumphs, as if the present holds no interest for someone whose entire identity remains anchored in historical accomplishments. The financial considerations that influence Marlene's career decisions during this period create pressures to continue performing even when her physical and emotional condition makes such appearances increasingly difficult to sustain. The woman who once commanded enormous fees for prestigious projects now finds herself calculating the minimum number of performances required to maintain her lifestyle while preserving whatever remains of her legendary status. "I was paid to be perfect and it ruined me," Marlene reportedly confides to a friend during her final years, suggesting someone who has finally achieved enough distance from her career to recognize its psychological costs. The comment reveals both the financial benefits her profession provided and the personal price of treating human emotion and individual personality as obstacles to be overcome rather than qualities to be celebrated. When Marlene Golan dies on May 6, 1992, her death receives minimal attention from the fashion press that once competed for her services. Obituaries are brief and factual, focusing on her peak years during the 1950s while providing few details about her life before or after fame. The woman who embodied untouchable elegance achieves ultimate untouchability through death, becoming truly impossible to reach, interview, or exploit for contemporary purposes. The legacy Marlene leaves behind exists almost entirely in photographs that continue to define sophisticated elegance decades after her death. Museum exhibitions about fashion history routinely feature her images, but always as anonymous representations of period style rather than documents of individual artistic achievement. She has become exactly what she once claimed to be, not a beautiful woman, but an idea of beauty, preserved in perfect images that reveal nothing about the person who created them. Marlene Dietrich's greatest achievement may have been her disappearance, the ability to vanish so completely that she became pure mystery, ultimate elegance expressed through absence rather than presence. In becoming a ghost, she achieved the kind of untouchable perfection that her modeling career had always pursued but never quite reached, proving that sometimes the most elegant solution to an impossible situation is simply to stop participating in it entirely. The question that Marlene Dietrich's death poses to contemporary culture centers on the relationship between public success and private fulfillment, between artistic achievement and human happiness. In an era where personal branding has become essential for professional advancement and social media demands, constant performance of carefully curated identities, what can we learn from someone who achieved ultimate success at such ultimate personal cost? Her legacy forces uncomfortable confrontations with questions about the price of perfection, the sustainability of living as pure performance, and the possibility of maintaining authentic relationships while systematically commodifying one's own mystique. Was Marlene Dietrich's transformation from person into symbol an artistic triumph or a human tragedy? Marlene Dietrich made her decision decades ago in the smoky cabarets of Berlin. But the questions she embodied about authenticity, performance, and the cost of perfection remain as urgent today as they were when she first stepped into the spotlight wearing a top hat and a knowing smile that promised everything while revealing nothing at all. Marlene Dietrich turned her entire existence into a stage performance. Was this the ultimate expression of freedom, or just another form of imprisonment? Do you think her confession, "I sold glamour all my life, but no one bought me," reflects her personal tragedy or the universal fate of anyone who achieves fame? If you could choose between leaving behind a perfect legend that inspires millions or living an imperfect life filled with genuine human connections, which would you choose? The price of becoming a legend is always loneliness, but is immortal glamour worth that sacrifice?